Locked On Seminoles fans, normally I don't do a whole lot of negative shows, but today, this defensive effort that I just went over, it's going to get negative.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles for a second edition today. Thank you for making this your first listen, no matter where you're at. And I appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles football with me. Today's show is brought to you by Ultimate College Football Head Coach. It's the brand new mobile game that is completely free, no ads, and 100% playable offline. Use code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game to receive a free boost for your program. Begin your coaching legacy today. I did part one this morning regarding college football's biggest game of the weekend and the offense for the Noles, what I thought would be at least pretty good. And it wasn't totally negative, but quite a bit negative. Well, this show that I'm about to do is far worse. The defense, and I focused on the defensive line when I went back through the film. I might go back through, focus more on the second level. I can't really see the secondary much, but right now, I don't think it matters as much as I originally thought with the linebackers. So this pod, while defense is going to certainly hit a lot on the defensive tackles, containment, physicality, angles, how to get off a block, suddenness. There's so many things that are just raw and natural that I didn't think Florida State did well against Georgia Tech, that I could probably make this an hour and a half podcast. I'm going to condense it to 25 minutes, hopefully less, because I don't like to be negative for this long, but there are very few things that I have positive to say. If you're somebody that needs sunshine and rainbows, back on out. This will not be for you. We're going to start with D-tackle play, move into the defensive ends a little bit, and then it's more about the general base of how Florida State did or did not do something that I think need to be corrected. And at the end, as I hinted on the Locked On Seminoles X handle, look, there's one thing that I really think they got to do, and that's play with more physicality, and that means hitting in practice. We're going to talk more about that here in just a little bit, but this first thing, though, is one that shocks me, and that's the defensive tackle play. Let me start with the following. When Darrell Jackson joined the Florida State program last year, he essentially joined up with Farmer, the other guy that happens to be starting at defensive tackle. Those guys played in high school together, right down the road at Gadsden County. And while they had certainly had a few moments during the game against Georgia Tech, by and large, both of them were really, really bad. And overall, as a defensive unit, they were really, really bad. Tech had 190 yards rushing, a lot of it right up the middle, whether it was Haynes King, whether it was Jamal Haynes, whether it was one of the backups, they just really took it to them. The interior for Tech is one of the best I think I'll see this year. They're really physical. They're guys that have an edge and a chip to them. They like to play through the whistle and all that. They overwhelm Florida State in many senses. But here's the part that really bothers. It's one thing to go up against guys that are physical. You're going to do that. It's Power 4 football. It's another to take terrible angles. It's another to play high right out at the gate. It's another to be slow off the snap consistently, like multiple guys, not just Farmer, not just Jackson, but like in general. There were a few plays like Pat got off the edge really quick, but overall they just didn't look like they wanted to be there as much. Like, it's mind-blowing. I don't understand how that is possible in a first game, and hopefully I'm overreading this. I did watch the game, and then I went back much again. My opinion got worse, not better. That's not good. By my calculations, going through the stats that I have, the starting defensive line for the Noles combined, 0 tackles that were really meaningful, like a 3rd down and 1 stuff. They had 6 total tackles, no sacks. And let me just make sure once again, but I've got the screen up here for my own computer. I don't believe that there's a single guy that had a tackle for loss. No, that's not in the starting unit. Lyons, who I thought honestly played the best, I'll talk about him in a moment, is the only defensive lineman to have any form of a tackle for loss. It's the play that Tech ran to the left. Florida State completely blew it up. Nicholson, the young linebacker from California, got a half tackle for loss on that one too. He shared it with Daniel Lyons. They've played some good snaps and this and that, but I'll talk about it more. But no starters role. A little preview here. No starters role up front, especially, should be safe. I don't care what your accolades were. They didn't look the part yesterday or on Saturday. So with that being stated, I think there's a couple other things to note. In particular with Farmer, once he got into a player, and I know I'm about to get kind of technical, but I don't know what else to do here. He just didn't have a lot of fight or secondary moves. If he slanted and wanted to get to a gap and he got beat, he just wrote it out. He didn't have enough initiative. He didn't have enough fight. He didn't have enough will and want to. Jackson was a little more downhill, but I still didn't see him making plays. There was one play in the second half where Haynes King had an opportunity to run the ball in the middle, and Jackson did a good job beating his guy. He did. Gets a hand on Haynes, but barely got anything out. And I know Haynes is strong, but he barely even slowed him down at all. Like, they just can't miss opportunities like that to get a run stuff. Ended up being like a 4-yard run. If you can get a 0 for them and instead they get a +4, man, that's a gut punch. Georgia Tech stayed on track, getting at least 4 yards on first down far too often. Their run success rate was nearly 70%. And most importantly, it just gave them confidence running right at the defensive tackles. Florida State stunk. Not bad, stunk at taking on run blocks. In particular, another point, this is part of it. You're not going to win these very often, but whenever they went like duo or any kind of double team, this just duo is one of the names. You double down, you hit the guy like the center. Their center is really good at Tech, by the way. He's a good football player. You go up to the second level. The linebackers didn't come downhill enough or avert the block after a double team attempt. It was terrible. It's one thing for the tackles to get pushed back. You're getting hit by 2 guys. There's still techniques you can do to improve that. But the linebackers didn't help, and they're just gaping holes. In the A-gap, Florida State has major, major problems right in the heart of their defense until otherwise proven. Now, I know that Thamel and some other people around the world of college football / the NFL scouts talked about how good Florida State's line is. That is garbage. I don't care what the accolades were prior. Just going on the defensive tackles, they're not in that conversation. And we're not done. Believe me, I have plenty more blame to throw out here. But in particular, on the inside, Farmer, I thought, played the worst. Jackson had a few more that he was kind of in the play with, but he's not that great. And they got pushed off the ball more than I even originally thought. And obviously, if you watched the aftermath podcast, if you will, of the debacle on Saturday, you noted that I wasn't very happy with the D-line then either. Moving on here, Daniel Lyons is the one guy at the D-tackle spot that I thought played a little better pad level. He's not great, but he's got better pad level, and he's one of those guys that's a plugger that will play hard, stay low, and try to get into the backfield. Kind of a traditional Florida State D lineman, not maybe at the same level, but like Corey Simon wasn't the tallest guy. But man, he was a bear to take care of, and he could get in the gaps and get up and go. So Lyons is one of those guys that I think's got some fight to him. I think he deserves more playing time, definitely based just on the Georgia Tech game. He deserves more playing time, and that's something to think about. Peyton, Marvin Jones, those guys, I'm looking at the stats right now. Like Marvin Jones, he had 2 tackles. Patrick Peyton had 1. And it's just not very good. They struggled. Too many of the tackles that they did have as a unit weren't stuffs. They weren't big plays. And again, only a half tackle for loss by the entire front, whether starting or otherwise, and none of them by the starters. So basically the D-line, if I graded it, at best it would be a D. I'm not done completely looking at it, but basically that's a D at best. And I think it's kind of embarrassing when you have that much physical raw talent combined with the experience they do, the strength staff that Florida State has. That should never happen, even against a good coached team in Georgia Tech. They're well coached. There's no question. Key, the offensive line coach, everybody, they do a nice job. That's fantastic. Some of this stuff is really basic, though. how you take on blocks, how you try to split a double team. Florida State didn't make those plays. They just didn't. And it showed. I don't really know what the reasoning is, but it better change, and it better change fast, because they've got, and I'll talk a teeny bit about this before the end of the show, they got BC a week from today, and their running quarterback, if possible, is more athletic than Haynes King, and they'll have some playmakers on that team. It's not a great BC team, but you screw around, if you can't stop the run on first down, any team can be in the game in the fourth quarter, so they better be ready. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the defensive ends and some of the big picture stuff on like why this happened and how to fix it. Hopefully, we're going to get into that next on Locked On Seminoles. Hey, Locked On Seminoles fans, I want to take a moment to give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love as much as I do, Ultimate College Football Head Coach. In this amazing game, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your football team to glory. Imagine being the head coach of the Florida State Seminoles. Recruiting players and hiring coaching staff to oversee training camps. You're going to have an opportunity to hand out scholarships, all the difficult decisions. How are you going to be able to handle that pressure? And here's what you should love about the game. Being responsible for offensive play calling. You make the calls. Ultimate College Football Head Coach is free. No ads, 100% playable offline. You can go as you want on the go, wherever you want. And of course, there's a special offer for Locked On Seminoles fans. Use promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all in caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk. Download the game. Just visit ultimate-cfb.com or look it up on the App Store. Ultimate College Football Head Coach. Download it today. College football is back, and it's not too late to catch up before the season kicks off. ACC, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, you can get it all from Locked On, stable of college football experts, by subscribing to the Locked On College Football podcast. Who has a chance to make the playoff? What teams will cause chaos in the new conferences? Everything you need to know all in one place. Be sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On College Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Here's the thing that I want to start off this part of the show with. Everything needs to be better fundamentally. Angles, taking away the outside edge to a mobile quarterback. We talked about it again last year before the BC game, then they didn't do it. Before this year's Georgia Tech game, they didn't do it. Florida State's edge defenders, that includes guys coming up in the box like a nickel or strong safety, Shaheem, etc. Everybody needs to take like an extra step to the perimeter, force it back inside. When I was in 7th grade, one of the first lessons I learned was to do that. I had a play where I went inside, took a risk, and I smoked the quarterback. He threw the pass, but incomplete, but I smoked the quarterback. One of the first plays that I ever got in the game. My coach told me, that's great, but if they'd have ran the ball outside, he'd have lit me up. He told me, if they run the ball inside on you and you protect the edge, and they get 20 yards or whatever, I don't care. Your responsibility is to protect the edge. They get 2 yards outside against you, I'm all over you. Turn it back inside. This is an old school thing. And again, I remember that from 7th grade. If you're playing outside linebacker, that's a spot you have to be ready to take on the guy in front of you, get his outside shoulder, hold on, lean into him, push him, whatever it is you're trying to do based on his alignment and the players around you. Bottom line is still the same. Hold the edge. Florida State, if nothing else against Boston College, if I see that, I'm going to lose. I might do a whole podcast on it. I don't want to see 4 and 5 yard runs that should be -2s because they didn't anticipate a very mobile quarterback running around the edge. And I know he's got great speed. There were a couple plays where I thought the edge was in pretty good shape. Haynes King's that fast. But after he did that kind of early in the game, you should know, like, this guy is elite athlete. Not good, elite. Florida State did not adjust. That's on players, not coaches. They're in college. This is an old theme. So that has to change. Number 2 here is one that I think everybody will agree with. When you're playing in the box in particular, I don't care if it's a safety coming down, if it's Nicholson, the young linebacker, if it's anybody like Lundy, whatever, they got to be more physical when there's just no other option, short yardage, something like that, and you got to take on somebody, then it's got to be more physical. Before the show ends, that's going to be a theme for about 3 minutes or so. I'm going to hammer that. It will not be very friendly. Matter of fact, it'll be a little nasty to a certain degree, but that's something we're going to come back to for a good reason, because I think Florida State's whole plan almost has to change after what I've seen and a little bit of what I've heard from talking to some people. I'm not very friendly about this. This is one of the biggest rules in football. So we'll come back to it, but they must have the mindset, hey, there's no way around this guy. It's 3rd and 2, 3rd and 1. Worst case scenario, I'm going to stuff the guard, play low. You're not going to run through a 320-pound guy. I get it. Stay low, let your teammate make the tackle. They didn't play selfless enough. They didn't play as a unit enough, and they sure as heck didn't play enough physical football to beat Georgia Tech at the point of attack. I was shocked at some of the angles and the lack of effort with certain plays. It was hit or miss, but the linebackers in particular just weren't good at filling the A and B gaps. They had too much space between themselves and the offensive line, like I talked about a little bit earlier in the show. They'd come off double team. They didn't close the gap. And then the lineman gets another running start after that at the line. What are you waiting on? Just really slow-footed. Didn't look instinctive at all. Even Lundy, he had one great play where he shot the gap and made a tackle in the backfield. But overall, I mean, they were really, really bad at attacking the line of scrimmage. So hats off to Georgia Tech. By all means, they had a lot of good plays, well coached, all those things. Again, just want to give them credence. But this is more a Florida State problem than it is Georgia Tech success. At most, they should have ran for about 140 yards. The yards after contact, the plays where they got the edge, etc., all this stuff with angles and effort, just obliterated. There's no excuse for that at Florida State, or really even a program like Virginia that's probably not going bowling anytime soon. They're a 4-8 to 5-7 program until otherwise proven in my book. They're not good. That's how Florida State played on defense in the box. Prove me wrong. I do want to mention a little bit about the secondary. I thought a couple things were interesting. Shaheem's a pretty darn good player. I think we all know that. He wears number 1 for a reason. You don't just hand that jersey number out for fun. And quite frankly, he's a guy that I really like overall, and I think long-term will have a pretty good season. But even he had a couple plays where I thought the stops that he made or being around the ball, he didn't go through guys quite as much. So that's going to bring up my final point that I mentioned just a moment ago, something that they need to do. And I'm going to get into that next here in Locked On Seminoles, and that's how they practice this week against Boston College must be 1,000,000% different. And it involves high risk. Too bad, got to do it anyway. It's going to make a lot of players mad. Too bad. If you don't like it, hit the road. Florida State football has to make a massive change this week against Boston College before the game. That's next on Locked On Seminoles. With zero sugar and a convenient portable size, 5-Hour Energy is the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5-Hour Energy website has flavors galore: watermelon, berry, tropical burst, grape, a whole bunch of different ones. You can try anything you like. On an extra way to look at this, you can also mix and match, make a 12-pack or 24-pack, have them delivered right to your door. It's a great way to do it. 5-Hour Energy is the brand that people like you have trusted for over 20 years. You're going to see them at your grocery store, your convenience store, and a lot of other locations right at the counter. Make sure you don't miss them when you're going out the door. You always know where to find them. You can always get them easily if you go online. Either way, it's easy to do. Stock up on the money-saving multi-packs to make sure you never run out of 5-Hour Energy. If you're on the go with 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5, hourenergy.com, and get 5-Hour Energy products every day, you can use promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. And this is valid through the September 30th, and cannot be used with other promotions. And the code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. – Thank you once again for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen of the day. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles football with me. It's a lot of fun, so please hit that notification bell and that like button, subscribe, and rate and review on this podcast. After you're done, check out my friends at Locked On ACC and Locked On College Football. All the news about Florida State with the stuff that's going on in the courtroom. You got the college football playoffs, NIL, transfers, injuries, all that stuff. Spencer McLaughlin in particular, my guy, Locked On College Football, has been all over this stuff, doing a great job. So make sure you check it out. Part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So here's my take. I'd mentioned this a little bit before I watched the film, and I'm all in on it now. Earlier today and the podcast the day before on Sunday talked about Florida State may need to change how they practice. We don't get to see all the practices, and I get that. But it's obvious based on how they performed, especially in the box, offensively and defensively for that matter, that Florida State is not even remotely hitting enough in practice. Let me define what I mean by hitting. There's a difference between thud and there's a difference between tackle to the ground. The latter is often frowned upon because it brings on more energy, brings about more injuries, and I get it. But as a friend of mine and former coach in the state of Florida used to tell me, you've got a choice. Brian, you've got a choice. You're either going to be the hammer or you're going to be the nail. We want to be the hammer. This was the guy that was at Lake Brantley on the north side of Orlando, ran an option team, and he wanted to be a downhill football team with a power fullback. Old school coach. And I think even though that era is kind of over, that philosophy, especially in practice, needs to be implemented more across the sport. And right now for Florida State, 1,000,000% it needs to be implemented. Florida State stinks at stopping the run. Florida State stinks at containing the edge. They weren't knocking any bodies back. They weren't getting enough guys hitting through. There were no emotional tackles because they went through somebody's chest. They must take the risk. I don't care if it's in the season. I don't care if it takes 3 weeks. They have to hit to the ground in practice, period. If they do not, you'll notice it against BC. They play Monday next week. You will notice it. Why? The following will happen. The same garbage that happened against Georgia Tech, with the lack of tackling, the lack of ability to get downhill with the linebacker spot. They got to do a better job with that. Some of these guys are experienced players. I mean, they are. DJ Lundy is a grad student. It's not like he's normally a very good tackler. But if you don't get to the chance to make a tackle, it doesn't matter. Part of hitting to the ground is literally basically a scrimmage or scrimmage-like situations. You got to have linemen taking on linebackers. There's no friendly. And if you're beat up going into the game, it is what it is. This is like an extension, what I'm saying, of fall camp. Florida State's inability to do anything at the line of scrimmage in critical situations, and by the way, especially on that last drive for Georgia Tech, is really embarrassing. They got to hit. They got to go to the ground. They got to make it hurt. They've got to want it. They got to see who has the will. And that brings up the very, very final point. The depth chart should be pretty much wiped clean, and especially with the guys in the box, because, like I said, Daniel Lyons, I thought, played the best of the D tackles. I haven't watched enough of the other guys to really rank it, but I was so enthralled with how bad the D line was. That's where I focused. Then I went into the linebackers a little bit, but they should all be under watch, depth chart wide open. You gave up almost 200 rushing yards to a team that can't throw. The running game was so bad. To stopping the running game was so bad, the quarterback ran 15 times and only threw 16. And a lot of them were just sort of short dinks and dunks to the flat and stuff, because the one thing Florida State does pretty well is rush the passer, and that's Georgia Tech's Achilles heel as an offense, apparently, because they didn't trust Haynes back there throwing it. Maybe they're worried about him in the turnovers. I get that, but I would have ran the ball too. So, again, to summarize today, defensive tackles, oh boy, that's a problem. The defensive ends, better angles. They got to set the edge more. Linebackers, especially on the inside, Riley, could be anybody. Omar Graham, it doesn't matter who. They got to be more consistent with getting in the face and in the lap of the offensive lineman. If there's just a sheer definite collision coming, there's no reason to wait. You're waiting on a 300-plus pound man to run at you. That's a horrendous idea. Take a side. Don't play through the man. Play half a man. Again, that's old school football. Pick up right at the point of attack. Make it a big pile up. If nothing else, 2nd and 8. Who cares? Give your teammate a chance by stymieing the lineman coming off the double team. Things like that. These are not that difficult. But at the same time, I know that there's things they're going to do better next week from game 1 to game 2. That's going to happen. I'm really curious, though, how physical will Florida State be at the point of attack against Boston College? I want to say it now, and on Tuesday's show, I'm going to break it down consistently. Thomas Castellanos might be the most gifted athlete in college football at the quarterback position. Just sheer athleticism. I'm not talking about football talent, athleticism. He ran for over 1,000 yards last year. He is a guy that can play running back at Florida State. He could play receiver at Florida State. He could play strong safety. He is a freak. If Florida State is not good at slowing down the quote-unquote traditional run inside the tackles with the fullback and running backs and all that kind of stuff, Castellanos will eat him alive. He'll have at least a couple of plays, I guarantee it, of 25-plus yards. Because once he hits the edge, he has elite speed. He's faster than Haynes King, if I had to guess, especially after contact, that next step coming off. Like if he breaks a tackle, he can hit top gear again so quickly. The explosiveness after contact, the ability to stay low and power through, Castellanos can do it. Florida State better hit this week in practice and learn to wrap up because there's just no way around it. They were awful against Georgia Tech, and it's an open book on how to play them until they prove otherwise. Why, if you're BC, would you throw it much? What's the reason? I wouldn't. Would you? It is. So in this epically negative podcast here today on Locked On Seminoles, I'm going to wrap it up. Once again, thank you for coming in and supporting Locked On Seminoles and making this your first listen each and every day. And this bonus issue, I wish this bonus episode, I should say, I wish it wasn't so negative and had more positive news, but I'm not going to lie to anybody. It is really bad right now. Florida State is not a top 25 team on defense the way they played against Georgia Tech. That I know. There's nowhere to go but up, basically. But please hit that like button and that subscribe. Hit that notification bell. Make sure that you share this podcast, rate and review. I will see you again on Tuesday. This has been Locked On Seminoles.